Technology Council, close partner with the Arizona Commerce Authority on many things, including the SBIR program. And today we have our March virtual SBIR Speaker Series event, and the topic is Something for Everyone, Understanding the NSF's SBIR program. A little bit about the Tech Council. We're a statewide organization with offices in Phoenix and Tucson. We have almost 800 member companies. We do about 100 events or over 100 events a year between Phoenix and Tucson. I want to mention a few upcoming events. We have one of our traditional After 5 tech mixers at Botco AI, and that's a free member event. That's on March 24th. On April 6th, we have our Optics Valley Technical Series. On Tuesday, April 19th, we have our virtual SBIR series, Beyond Agriculture, Unlocking USDA's SBIR program. That's a free event for members and non-members. On the 19th, we have a virtual tech series, speaker series, Apprenticeships. This is really an important one, building the IT and cyber talent pipeline for Arizona companies. This is in collaboration with ASU, who has a USDOL grant focused on this area. And then finally, on April 22nd, our 12th annual Tucson golf tournament. During the course of the meeting today, if you could all keep your audio on mute. And if you have questions, please ask them at any time in the chat area. Or you can use the raise your hand icon, and Kyle will ask you to unmute and ask Alistair, our speaker today, any questions you might have. Again, I want to thank the Arizona Commerce Authority for being the presenting sponsor for our virtual SBIR speaker series. And we, again, work closely together on many initiatives and events and public policy and a variety of things. And I'd like to, in fact, turn it over to the ACA and introduce Kyle Homan, who's going to introduce our speaker. Kyle?
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. Kyle Homan. I'm here with the Arizona Commerce Authority. As Steve mentioned, we are the premier sponsor for this event. We also have some upcoming events as well that I'll just put on your radar. Next week, March 31st, we have an NSF workshop on specifically the proposal and pitch aspect of NSF SBIR applications. April 13th, we have another workshop that goes over the data rights component of SBIR funding. And then April 19th, as Steve mentioned, we also have a USDA SBIR program as well. I'm going to introduce our speaker for today's NSF SBIR presentation, Alistair Monk. Just a little background on Alistair. Alistair joined the NSF as an SBIR STTR program director in November of 2019. Prior to joining the NSF, Alistair was an active member of the startup ecosystem in Virginia as a mentor, judge, and entrepreneur. He's been directly involved in medical startups for the last 10 years, and most recently, he was the vice president of medical products at Cupron Inc., where he led development, protection, and commercialization of a platform copper antimicrobial technology. He also founded and ran Crystal Age Consultants, a consultancy firm mentoring and providing strategic support to medical startups. Prior to these experiences, Alistair was head scientist at Biocontrol Ltd., now Armada Pharmaceuticals, developing and commercializing bacteriophage therapy for clinical applications. Alistair had an active academic life as a microbiology postdoc at Virginia Commonwealth University in internal medicine, and has authored a number of published papers, conference abstracts, and oral presentations. He has a PhD in microbiology from the University of Bath, UK, and a Bachelor of Science in microbiology from the University of Birmingham as well. Alistair, I'm going to kick it over to you, and I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Carl, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Firstly, let me just thank the sponsors for today, ACA and Arizona Tech Council, for having us. We appreciate the opportunity to present, especially given the recent exciting announcements that have been made about some of the changes at the NSF. So I plan to talk probably for about 25 to 30 minutes, talk a little bit about some of the programs, some of the new exciting news that's just been released and announced. And as I say at the end, should hopefully leave some time for Q&A. Let me just, if I may, share my screen, make sure everyone can actually see my presentation. Can everybody see my presentation okay? Carl, could you let me know if you can see it?
Can see it, Alistair.
Great, thanks so much. So again, thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to you all today. As I say, really today, given the exciting news, want to talk a little bit about, the Directorate for Technology, Innovation and Partnerships, as well as give an introduction to a number of the programs that are now within TIP and also the NSF generally. So as everybody may very well be aware, the National Science Foundation invests in the full spectrum of fundamental research that includes exploratory, curiosity-driven research all the way through to use-inspired or solution-oriented research. So across this spectrum, the NSF obviously tries to fund as many important things we can and to provide benefits back to the American people. So as everyone can see, just given on FY 2019 information, about 11,000 awards overall were given out across the NSF, and ultimately, historically, over 242 Nobel Prize winners have also been funded. The budget for us since FY 2020 is about 8.3 billion, and overall, the NSF has looked at about 41,000 proposals generally. The NSF is very broad and very diverse and supports really all areas of science and engineering. As you can see, here's a list of some of those separate areas that are covered, but ranging from biological sciences all the way through to integrative activities, social, behavioral and economic sciences, as well as geosciences, including the polar programs. Some of the interesting things that we're here to talk to you a little bit about today is, we are somewhat at a pivotal moment for the nation and society with the challenges of our time, creating some demands that we start scaling some of these investments into a number of different areas and start building bridges really between the discovery, innovation and commercialization of those technologies. And so that's really where the Directorate for Technology, Innovation and Partnerships, or TIP, is hopefully an important first step towards trying to tackle some of these challenges and then really building and layering on top of that research and innovation ecosystem that's already been out there. TIP ultimately is there to address and hopefully a critical need to advance the landscape around innovation, start to engage communities that have for too long have potentially been unserved, I should even say, in the nation's research and innovation ecosystem. And so really TIP is trying to build on an organizational culture of innovation and a portfolio of programs to foster public-private partnerships to advance that technological innovation and translation process. And so ultimately, TIP is really trying to build on the NSF's rich history over the last 70 years by building partnerships with other directorates and offices within the NSF to strengthen and scale the NSF's investments. And so it's really about trying to harness the diverse talent pool that exists, especially in critical and emerging technologies that try to address pressing societal and economic challenges, as well as accelerate that translation of research, really moving things from the lab all the way through to commercialization and therefore providing that impact and benefit to society. So hopefully TIP's aim is to improve US competitiveness, try to grow the US economy, and ultimately training a diverse, skilled workforce for future high-wage jobs. And so, as I say, to do that, we're really looking at trying to elevate historic support for fundamental science with a focus on use-inspired and translational research by creating TIP, the Technology and Innovation Partnership Directorate, that is going to be cross-cutting. And so it's cross-cutting in the sense that it will hopefully build bridges with a number of the NSF existing programs and directorates in order to try to spur innovation to address the societal and economic challenges that we all face. And doing so, hopefully bring new technologies to market and to obviously address the societal needs, whilst also hopefully investing in a diverse talent pool that's going to be necessary in the future in order to really make some of these aims come to life. And so, as I say, to talk about that, really, TIP is focusing on three major focus areas by being this cross-cutting platform. And those three major areas really are fostering innovation ecosystems, establishing these translation pathways, really trying to move things from the lab to the market, and then also partnering in order to try to engage the nation's talent, I should say. And so this directorate's going to work very closely with the NSF in order to help grow things at a size and scale, leading to rapid transformation of some of these technologies and some of these areas that are going to be required in order to address ongoing challenges. So together it's going to build together researchers, practitioners, and ultimately users to cooperatively design and create pathways in order to do this. So a lot of existing NSF or several existing NSF programs, so ICOR, the SBIR STTR program, Convergence Accelerator, PFI, have all been moved and repositioned within TIP. And so today, obviously, just going to give an overview of the programs really that fall within the ICOR program, PFI, and SBIR STTR introduction. Not going to talk about some of the other areas, but also I would encourage everybody to please stay tuned. Hopefully there are some ideas for future programs that will be coming, along and down the pipeline relatively soon. So obviously tackling first the translational, the lab to marketplace program. So really looking at the SBIR STTR program, PFI and ICOR. I'm delighted to talk to you a little bit about this today. So the SBIR program, the seed fund that I work for, I'm a program director in the digital health area of the SBIR STTR program, is really looking to fund startups in the development of groundbreaking, high impact, high risk technology investment, hopefully transforming scientific and engineering discoveries into products and services that will have broad commercial and societal potential. So NSF funding goes towards R&D, hopefully moving companies to be able to de-risk technology and achieve commercial success. So at a high level, the NSF awards about $200 million a year in R&D funding for small businesses, and the SBIR STTR program at the NSF is up to about $2 million for your company now. And the funding of the SBIR STTR program is as broad as the NSF is, we've already talked about earlier. So here you can see a breakdown of some of the areas that SBIR STTR awards went to in FY 2020. So that includes IT, life sciences, materials and manufacturing, as well as chemistry and the environment. What you'll also see is an other topics. So if you don't necessarily think that your idea or your company has a specific fit into some of the programs that are already being outlined here, it's something to bear in mind that we are open to basically any great idea. So if you cannot find a home within some of these broader categories, we do have other topics where we'd be delighted to receive any ideas that you may not feel necessarily fit specifically into that. And so of these awards, more than half of phase one proposals awarded in FY 2020 were actually from first-time applicants. These are companies that have never submitted a proposal to the NSF before. And 95% of the phase one awards that were made were actually to startups that had less than 10 employees. And 81% of those awards in FY 2020 also went to startups that were established within the last 5 years. So just to give you an idea of some of the companies that have been funded, this is not to say these are specific things that we look at. This is just data that we've pulled from the awards that have been made. We are obviously open to any eligible company putting in a project pitch or a proposal in order for us to look at your great ideas. And so ultimately, overall, the program has made over 2,200 awards to startups and small businesses, and ultimately has achieved about $14 billion in follow-on institutional funding with over 200 successful exits. So just something to look at in terms of where the program has come from and ultimately the successes that some of the program has had. And so I think just to give you some specific examples of SBIR STTR companies, these are actually companies that are based in Arizona. They're actually from my portfolio. So delighted to talk a little bit about them today. So Emagine Solutions is really trying to build a predictive model that's going to detect preeclampsia in the early stages of pregnancy. This is a recent phase one awardee. These can ultimately helpfully make alerts and help throughout the postpartum period as well as during pregnancy around other areas. Literaseed is another Arizona-based company, and ultimately this has been This is trying to design a platform that's going to expedite diagnosis and facilitate kind of personal information capture in healthcare, utilizing AI to do it. A third company is Researchering, which is actually making and developing educational tools in order to make simulated vascular components as part of surgical training. And so they can ultimately assist with skills feedback, as well as doing surgical planning and potentially giving examples of surgical procedures. So these are obviously proud Arizonian companies. I'm glad to talk about them a little bit, and they are all based within my portfolio. So how does the SBIR STTR program work at the NSF? Well, it works with a phase 1, phase 2 type system. So you'll obviously have to apply for a phase 1. This is feasibility research. This is a slightly older slide. I apologize. Our most recent solicitation is actually at $275,000 for phase 1 for feasibility research. They're moving towards phase 2. Phase 2 is really moving towards MVP creation, prototyping. It's a longer award, 24 months. Up to $1 million award all in. And as you can see, you cannot go direct to phase 2 with our program. You have to obviously enter as a phase 1, just due to assisting you in de-risking and demonstrating the feasibility of your approach in order to move to phase 2. We also offer supplements and other downstream programs, such as the 2B investment. This is a third-party investment match or sales match of up to an additional $500,000 of NSF funding to match up to $1 million of outside capital. This obviously, as you can see even here, plus other supplements would add up to that figure of up to $2 million that could be invested in your company. So obviously a great question to look at is, well, how do you get started with the NSF SBIR STTR program? And so one of the things that we obviously would like to do is talk a little bit now about project pitches, talk a little bit about proposals, and move forward from there. So the process overall would be to put in a project pitch. The project pitch is really a first introduction and a first connection with the NSF SBIR STTR program, with the program directors that run it, in order to allow us to understand a little bit about your idea, to understand your suitability and eligibility for the program, and then ultimately really for just to allow us to get an initial conversation and dialogue going. If you are then successful in your project pitch and you're invited to, you may then submit a full proposal. The solicitations then we publish each year, and these tell you a little bit about, the company registrations that you're going to need. We have multiple submission windows each year, and then ultimately you will receive a decision on your proposal, and it takes up to 6 months in order to get that proposal feedback. What I would say is the difference between a project pitch and a proposal is there are no submission windows for project pitches. You can submit your good ideas anytime online. And once you have that project pitch invitation, it's good for 12 calendar months, so a year. So you then may submit your proposal into any of the submission windows that are available in order to bring your proposal forward for review. So that's really the big differences between the two. So again, it hopefully is a way, and it's a required first step for you to put in a project pitch so that we can really start to understand suitability and eligibility for the program. It's really getting feedback within 3 to 4 weeks, and hopefully allow us to reduce some of that ongoing burden in order to understand whether your idea would be a good fit for the program. The project pitch is actually broken into 4 areas. So what is the innovation? What are the technical objectives and challenges that you face? What is the market opportunity? And then an opportunity to introduce us to your company and to the team. All in, it's probably close to a couple of pages that are split up into these 4 areas. And we'd really obviously like to get a clear elucidation and articulation about the challenges that you face, the R&D that you plan to do, what makes you novel, what makes you unique, what is your innovation, how is that ultimately going to be linked to being able to sort of move the ball forward? What is the high risk, high reward type endeavor that you're embarking upon? And then ultimately, how do you plan to deploy this commercially? What market? And how is your team ultimately the right team to get you there? These are things that we would look for. So what is the impact going to be of your potential? What is your innovation? As we've already talked about, what is your market pull? And then ultimately, how are you going to be able to scale this and grow this? And so in terms of eligibility, these eligibility is set by the SBA, and obviously can assist anybody if they need to finding out more about the eligibility. There's some great resources online to determine whether you are eligible for the SBIR program, but at a high level, really less than 500 employees You must be majority owned by a US citizen or a permanent resident. All of the technical R&D and all of the work on the SBIR must be done within the United States. And ultimately, the PI on your proposal, the principal investigator, will need to spend a majority of the time on the project. So 20 plus hours a week and ultimately 173 hours per 6 months. As we've already talked about, we look at startups across nearly all areas of technology, and what you see here is actually a screenshot of all of the areas within the SBIR STTR program. And so we really are looking for startups that do innovative R&D work that have potential commercial and broad societal impact. Again, if you don't see a particular category that you feel your company or your idea would fit into, that's okay. We obviously have other topics. We would just be interested in you moving forward and putting in a project pitch so we can learn a little bit more about you and your team and your company and your idea. The only things that we don't fund, just to be clear, is we don't fund work that involves Schedule 1 controlled substances, and we don't fund clinical trials. So as long as your technical R&D doesn't encompass those 2 points, then obviously we would like to obviously learn more. You can submit, again, your project pitch at any time. You're limited to 1 project pitch under review per window, and it takes about a month, as I said, in order to get that back. And the URL posted here is the correct URL to go and apply and put in your project pitch. So I'd encourage you to move forward to the project pitch and tell us a little bit more about any great ideas you have as soon as you can. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about alternate programs that are available. So talking a little bit now about PFI. This is the Partnerships for Innovation. This is really the next step in advancing NSF funded research towards the marketplace. And so it's really trying to promote a sustainable academia-based innovation ecosystem whilst training faculty and students in technological innovation. It's also trying to engage women and other underrepresented groups. And really the kind of expected program outcomes would be, technological development that would move you towards commercialization, whilst fostering collaborations between faculty, students, and obviously industry or market experts, with the faculty and students that have a history of NSF awards moving towards technological translation and moving towards entrepreneurship. And so, as you can see, there are 2 separate tracks within the PFI program. So there is the RP track that requires partnership with an industry company, and there's also the TT track that doesn't require that, and so that's just a solo institution. So you can see the 2 different funding levels that are available for that. Overall, the budget for this program back in FY 2018 was about $20 million, and so it's a great way to move forward, prototyping, advancing commercialization for technologies that have a history of NSF awards. It's open to any technology area covered by the NSF, and as part of the program, you will be expected to do the ICOR program, which is an extensive customer discovery program that we're going to talk about in just a minute here. And so this is really the PFI program, or Partnerships for Innovation. It doesn't require employment at the small business, so you don't actually have to create a startup in order to do it. So it's one of those things where you can obviously look at just moving forward that NSF funded awards and start translating some of that research that's already been funded. That's probably a great segue to talk a little bit about ICOR. And so ICOR is really designed to spur translation of fundamental research by training NSF-funded faculty and students on innovation and entrepreneurship skills. So what it really is it's an intensive customer discovery exercise based over 7 weeks, designed to really understand whether you have product market fit and really to understand whether you have with your customers ultimately with something that your idea would be able to solve a problem that your customers are having. And so right now there's 9 nodes that involve about 27 universities with 99 university sites. The program has been successfully adopted by at least 8 other federal agencies, and ultimately over 1,600 teams have gone through the ICOR program with nearly 800 startups created. And so back in for FY 2018, the program total here was about $33 million. So ICOR is really is really designed in order to undertake this extensive customer discovery exercises. It's not about selling, it's not about pitching, it's not about business plans, it's not about writing a go-to-market plan. It is really focused on, can you achieve product market fit, and can you build the team together that's ultimately going to be trained in innovation and entrepreneurship to understand whether you have that product market fit, and whether your idea is going to be an idea that ultimately is going to be able to address the needs of your customer, and ultimately whether what it is, the problems that they're facing, can be tackled by your technology. We're always looking for mentors as well for this. So if you are interested, please do think about signing up as a mentor for I-Core, or alternatively for the SBIR STTR program. We're always interested in having reviewers with strong technical or strong commercial background reach out to us in order to engage, in order to assist us with the review of the proposals that we receive each year. So if you're looking at ways you could contribute to the program, being a mentor in I-Core, or alternatively signing up as a reviewer for the NSF SBIR STTR program, would also be valued, along with PFI as well. So I'm just going to take a minute or two, kind of wrap up, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So TIP, in a nutshell, based on the recent exciting announcements that have been made, is really looking at use-inspired, challenge-driven, convergent research with this Directorate for Technology, Innovation and Partnerships that's cross-cutting, designed to work with all of the established NSF funding that's already available, whilst building public-private partnerships, and ultimately is looking at long-term, large-scale impact and innovation. Obviously, we've had an introduction to SBIR, PFI, and I-Core. I know we've had a lot of information shared. So if you're looking for further links, please do feel free to contact tip at nsf.gov. You see our URL, which is seed fund, so like a plant seed, fund.nsf.gov. That is the website that has all of the information on about the SBIR STTR program. Our email contact address, sbir@nsf.gov, is also available. And then my email, which is amonk, AMONK, @nsf.gov, is also there in case we don't have an opportunity to obviously answer all of the questions that you may have today. So with that, I'm quite happy to take any questions, Carl, that anybody may have.
Awesome. Thank you, Alistair. And while we're transitioning to Q&A, Daryl's actually going to put up a quick poll just to kind of gauge people's familiarity with the SBIR program. It'll be in the chat. While he's doing that, allow me to also bring up a couple programs that the ACA is offering as it pertains to SBIR funding. The first one here, let me post the link, is our FAST grant program. And what that is a grant that's funded through the SBA, and it allows companies that are interested in applying for an SBIR program to submit their application in order to receive $3,000 in grant funding for the application process, whether it's hiring a grant writer or funds to access research facilities. So that's one program that the ACA is offering, as well as the upcoming Tech Connect conference in DC. What that is it's a seasonal conference that occurs in Washington DC, and it's a program that allows program managers from all different funding agencies and entrepreneurs who are interested in applying to the SBIR program to attend and get insight into specifically upcoming submission windows and funding for different projects. So the ACA is also offering a grant to pay for the conference registration, and that link I just posted in the chat as well, and that link closes April 1st. So if you're interested in applying for an SBIR grant, please feel free to apply to the SBIR FAST grant. And if you're interested in attending this DC conference in order to gain more knowledge on the SBIR program, feel free to apply to that as well. And let me just label what this one is for. And let's see, as I said, Daryl put the poll in. We got some responses. We do have some questions in the chat. The first one is from Amy. She is curious if you have ever worked with GSA Region 5 SBIR office Dr. Rodney Kuick. Or Kuick.
I'm sorry, Carl. Was that question directed to me?
Yes, Alistair. Sorry, I apologize.
Oh, no, absolutely. I personally have not worked with Dr. Kuick. Apologize for the pronunciation if that's incorrect.
Cool. Thank you. Another question in the chat. Someone says, if I'm proposing a new tech that investigates AI use in an agricultural field, do you recommend that I apply in the agri field or the AI field?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking that. So one of the great things about the project pitch process is that all of the program directors that oversee their respective areas actually work very closely together with each other. And so at the end of the day, I would just suggest that you look at your technical innovation and you put it into where you think it fits the best. Ultimately, as part of that review process, we will go through and we will look at where we believe that best fit to be, and we will make that determination and send it to that program director. And so that program director in the respective topic area where we think it fits best will then be the one to review it and respond to you. So I wouldn't, what I'm trying to say at a high level is I wouldn't worry too much about getting it specifically right. We will help you with that behind the scenes and make sure that it arrives at the best destination. A lot of it is really just putting it into wherever you feel, it would fit the best, and we'll take care of it behind the scenes.
Cool, thank you. Another question, this is from Eric Miller. He says, how important is it for the company to be a startup? Are well-established small businesses also a target for the program?
So yeah, obviously we are interested in good ideas that come from anywhere. I think, if you're looking at a well-established small business, I think some of the questions that you would want to consider as you start maybe thinking about the SBIR is, what is the high risk type endeavor that you're going to be undertaking? Our program traditionally doesn't support things like incremental engineering or kind of straightforward applications. And so what is kind of the high risk, high reward type innovation that you're undertaking? That's something I would look at. We'll obviously assist you in that determination when you put in a project pitch, but you don't have to be a startup. No, as long as you are eligible under the rules, I think I talked a little bit about, there's more eligibility information available from the SBA. As long as you're eligible to apply, we'd obviously love to hear from you. And then, as I say, the only points you may want to consider is, what is it that you're actually looking at? A lot of our funding is purely for technical R&D, so it isn't to support companies moving forward. It isn't potentially to support pivots into new fields. It's really about high risk, high reward type technical innovation, and then the R&D associated with demonstrating that feasibility, that viability, and then de-risking it. So I hope that answers your question. If not, I'm happy to follow up.
Awesome. Thank you, Alistair, for that. Question from Steve. He's wondering if you've met Ponch, the NSF director. He is a friend of both the ACAs and the tech councils from his time at ASU.
I will say I actually haven't had the pleasure of meeting Panch one-on-one. I have obviously attended a lot of work with him. With the NSF being virtual, it's kind of stopped some of that personal interaction. I do look forward to hopefully potentially meeting him in the future, and aware of the time at ASU. But yeah, I have not had an opportunity to meet one-on-one, but have been part of sessions with him, and I appreciate his leadership.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Alistair. Randy Gustafson has a question. Good to see you, Randy. He says, were there other requirements for the PI for SBIR grants beyond the 20+ hours a week minimal work effort?
So, some of the key things, obviously, for the PI will need to be that they are employed by the company as well. So you'll need to be, the bulk of your time will need to be employed at the company. So over 51% of your time will actually need to be employed by that small business. Outside of that, it's often also just making certain that you believe you have the right competencies to be able to do a lot of the work that's going to be, put out there on the technical R&D, or at least have some background to be able to show kind of the technical or commercial progress that you be able to move forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Alistair. We feel free to keep posting your questions in the chat. If you don't mind, Alistair, I actually have some questions that I'd like to ask you as well.
Sure.
While more people put theirs in the chat as well. I guess one of my questions would be, what role can nonprofits play in the SBIR STTR process?
I appreciate it. So one of the eligibility criteria is that you must be organized for profit in order to hold an SBIR STTR award. So not-for-profits can certainly work with award companies and potentially can provide whatever capabilities or competencies are needed to achieve some of the goals of the company, but they themselves unfortunately are not eligible to apply for the SBIR STTR program as a grant awardee or grant holder.
Okay, kind of along that lines, from a more academic level, can a faculty member at a college or university serve as the PI on SBIR or STTR project?
As long as they feel that they're able to address the eligibility criteria, so as long as they're able to be primarily employed by the small business and obviously fulfill the time requirements, then they're absolutely fine to be the PI on the proposal. You know, whether that's a leave of absence, whether that's a sabbatical, whether that's something else. But as long as you genuinely believe that you are able to fulfill the PI requirements, then yes, obviously PI faculty are more than capable of serving as PIs, and also I will add that they're also able to serve as potentially co-PIs. So if a facility provides expertise in order to the small business, whether that's research capabilities, equipment, whether that's just special knowledge, then you may also stay as and in your academic role and just support the small business by working with them as a sub-awardee or potentially working with them as a consultant.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate that answer. This kind of ties into a question that someone else asked. If a proposal could be relevant to both the NSF as a topic as well as another funding agency such as the DoD, and the question from the individual about agriculture and AI, that made me think, oh, it could also be tied into the USDA's SBIR program. Can an individual submit to two separate agencies with the similar proposal topic if both agencies have funding requests out at the same time? That's similar.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I appreciate it. Yes. As an individual, you have every right to apply to whatever programs you feel are appropriate and you're eligible to apply to. The only kind of downside to that, if you will, or the kind of champagne problem you might have if multiple people want to fund you is you may not have duplicitous funding for the same technical tasks. So obviously, if you are proposing the same technical work on the same platform to both agencies, you probably may have to pick one agency to work with if both proposals are obviously move forward to award. And that doesn't become an issue, obviously, if only one agency decides to fund you. But again, if multiple agencies decide to fund you, then you probably will have to pick one. It is actually not legal to hold duplicitous federal funding for the same technical work to be performed.
Thank you. That's super helpful. Another question in the chat on the nature of funding. Are there TABA funds available under the NSF SBIR program?
Yeah, so Raymond, thank you for the question. Yes, so at phase 2, we do have up to $50,000 can be budgeted in a phase 2 proposal for TABA funds in order to provide technical or business assistance. So yes, we do have that available for phase 2 applicants and phase 2 companies, not available at phase 1.
Awesome. Thank you for that. This question was sent to me directly. What info should be included in an email requesting time to meet with the program manager? And what should you do to prepare for your call with an SBIR program manager?
It's a great question. I appreciate it. I think it's always one of those things which is program directors are there obviously to help you. So I would think a little bit about, making sure that you've used all the resources that are available to you. So the NSF now has webinars every 2 weeks. And these are focused on preparing a project pitch. They are focused on writing a proposal. They are focused on an introduction to the SBIR STTR program. We also have obviously published the solicitation, which has a lot of information on what we're looking for, review criteria, and we also have really a tremendous amount of information available on our website, which I will plug once more as I have the microphone, which is seedfund.nsf.gov, and there's a huge amount of information in there on how to get going, how to prepare your project pitch. The reason I bring all this up is if you have specific questions about any of that information, we're happy to help you. If you're looking to kind of talk to a program director about your idea or to talk a little bit about your technology, then the most appropriate way to do that, honestly, is a project pitch. We have a system by which you can put in information on your company, information on your technology, and if we need more information, we can always respond to you. The reason I say that is that's also the required first step that you will have to do in order to move forward for a proposal anyway. Outside of that, if you still need to talk to a program director, I'm sure in whatever response that they send back to you, should you request a call and obviously it be granted, then I'm sure they'll tell you of anything that they would need in advance to make sure that they're well prepared and well briefed for that call. But again, I would really strongly encourage everybody to look at the resources that are available. If you still have questions after that, then do feel free, obviously, to reach out via our webinars to learn more and ask questions directly from the program directors there. If that obviously still isn't an opportunity and your question hasn't yet been answered, then obviously you may feel free to email for information. But if you really want to talk about your company and your team and your technology, then I would strongly encourage you to put in a project pitch so that we can, if we need more information, we at least have a grounding in what it is.
No, that's super helpful, Alistair. So thank you for sharing that. You specifically have a background in the more biomedical side and topics with the NSF. Can you kind of explain a little bit how maybe a biomedical topic from the NSF would be different than, say, the NIH?
Yeah, I guess so. So a lot of the NSF focus is also, really focused around that technological, high risk, high reward type innovation. So we're really looking for things that are at the cutting edge of science and engineering that we can potentially demonstrate the feasibility and viability of, so we can start moving towards commercialization. If we look at other organizations, especially ones that are mission focused, most of them will be related to health or health outcomes. They obviously will fund clinical trials. This is the NIH, for instance, I'm specifically talking about. They will do things that are really focused into any of their specific mission-based calls. The NSF is more technologically focused, so we do not fund clinical trials. We are not necessarily looking for specific health-related outcomes. We're more broadly looking at technologies, services, products that may be able to have broad societal impact, have commercial feasibility, and ultimately, may require NSF funding in order to de-risk what is a cutting-edge type approach. So I don't know if it's a great comparison to make, but the difference I would make between the biomedical areas in the NSF and potentially other areas would be that specific focus on health. Ours are traditionally platform, we're agnostic of indication, we're agnostic of health condition. I would also say that we don't fund clinical trials as opposed to things like the NIH funding, where they may be able to move you more into that actual clinical efficacy, regulatory testing, those type of areas. And then the final point I'd make is also, they offer routes that we don't potentially offer, like direct to phase 2s, whereas we will obviously be a phase 1, phase 2 type approach, and we're heavily focused on the technological side rather than potentially the clinical efficacy, the regulatory work, or any of those others. So hopefully that answered the question. If there's more specific kind of comparison, I'm happy to talk about that.
No, that is helpful. Thank you. Kind of just comparing sort of the program between the SBIR and the STTR. If can a company switch from an SBIR phase 1 proposal to an STTR phase 2 proposal, or vice versa?
Yes, companies do have the ability to moderate that. So the SBIR program and the STTR program, and I apologize if I didn't cover this particularly clearly in the presentation, but really they're just two different ways to achieve the same goal. The SBIR program is, focused on both programs are focused on funding the business, and then it's really a question of what core competencies you need to achieve your ultimate technical R&D. So SBIR is, capped at about 1/3 of the budget going out to sub-awards or consultants, whereas the STTR program will allow you to put up to 60% of your budget to sub-awards and consultants. So again, depending upon the level of integration that you feel you need in order to achieve your technical R&D goals, and again, whether that's specialist equipment, whether that may be access to specialist knowledge, those are all, you will pick whichever program. But yes, if you submit as an STTR, for instance, phase 1, and you choose to move to an SBIR phase 2, that's absolutely allowed. As is the converse, if you were to go from a SBIR phase 1 to an STTR phase 2, you would have that right. Again, just depending upon where you ultimately feel a lot of that technical competency and skill set's going to come from that will help you achieve your overall R&D goals.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Kind of in the similar train of thought of kind of priority shifting between a phase 1 and a phase 2. If you're doing an STTR and you partner with a research institution, is it required that that same research institution be a part of your phase 2 application?
No, it's not required that you would use the same institution because, hopefully over the course of phase 1 and moving into phase 2, you would have achieved whatever technical goals you needed to achieve in order to demonstrate your platform or your technology's feasibility and viability. If you need to continue a relationship with that, research institution, you are able to. But if you've also ultimately demonstrated that feasibility and viability well enough that that association kind of runs its course and you feel that you can move it forward either within the company or with another provider, you absolutely have that right. So there is no requirement written in our solicitations that, once you sign up to work with a research institution, they will be your partner for life. That's really up to the twists and turns of the company and ultimately where you feel you can be best served by the skills and the competencies you have around you.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Kind of on the last topic of STTR, I've heard that oftentimes in different funding agencies, STTR topics sometimes go unfunded. Is that the case at the NSF? Are there topics that are simply not being applied to and not being awarded out through the STTR program?
So I appreciate the question. The short answer is no, and the longer answer is we have a combined SBIR STTR phase 1 solicitation. So it's really an application into a single solicitation, and because of the diversity, I think in the funding areas that we have, we've already talked about potentially other mission-focused agencies, but with the NSF SBIR STTR program, because of the diversity of the technological areas that we fund, and because of the agnostic nature that we have, no, it's not a situation where we are not receiving STTRs. It's also one of those situations, I think, where just because of the high risk, high reward type innovation that we fund, especially based on, scientific and engineering breakthroughs. I think you already posed the question earlier, Carl, about potentially faculty members serving in small businesses or spin outs from academic research. We don't traditionally, we are not underserved, I should say, in STTR proposals. We obviously would look for more. We obviously would like as many proposals as we can get. So, my final plug would be, if you have a great idea, please feel free to put in a project pitch. But yeah, no, we are not in a situation where our STTR bucket goes underserved. But we would always welcome and appreciate more great ideas and more proposals.
Awesome. No, thank you. That's super helpful. Another question from Raymond. What TRL level would be a typical phase 1? Would a typical phase 1 NSF project be? Understanding that the TR level does not equate to the level of risk.
I think I appreciate the question. That's a really difficult question to answer because I don't think there is a typical phase 1 project, and I don't think there's a typical TRL level. And because, as Raymond's already identified, risk is not encompassed in the TRL level, I think it's safe to say that I can't really give you a great idea as to what specific TRL level. I would say if you have a great idea that you believe has got broad societal benefit and ultimately has commercial potential, and you're looking at high risk type innovation where you believe that the markets may be unable to bear it at this time, then that's the sort of thing that the NSF is interested in, is things where we can assist with funding in order to de-risk some of these risky concepts, hopefully then help you assess some of the other risks that are available, such as market risk, and move forward to commercialization. So I apologize if that's not as detailed an answer, but I think it's a very difficult one to give you a specific value on. I think it's, again, if you have a great idea that you believe is going to make a big impact in society and also has commercial viability, and please feel free to bring it forward, and we'd love to see it.
Thank you, Alistair. I think one aspect of SBIR proposals that doesn't necessarily get a lot of attention, or maybe as much attention as it should, are letters of support. Could you kind of go into explain a little bit about how important letters of support are in a strong proposal, and what does sort of a strong letter of support contain?
I appreciate the question. So I think letters of support are important and strongly recommended in all proposals. I think it's difficult to say, what makes a strong proposal, but in all proposals, I would think letters of support, is something that you should consider including. And these letters of support, you may only use 3 at the phase 1, but they're really an opportunity for you to talk to the program director and for you to talk to the review panel, really through somebody else's words. So they can be used to undermine the need that may exist for the technology. They may be able to show strong strategic support from partners or people that, ultimately, maybe patient advocacy, maybe support groups, maybe general, lobbying groups, industry groups. These also can be support letters from investors that would talk about the commercial potential that you may have downstream once this has been, technologically de-risked. I think letters of support, the ones that I think also are always things that kind of have value to proposals, are things that are supportive in somebody's own words and specifically talks about what is supportive of that. So again, if you're talking about a letter of support from a strategic partner, why is that strategic partner, for instance, wanting to be involved? What is it that they're actually kind of supporting? Those are all things I think that ultimately have value.
Well, thank you for that, Alistair. I think another aspect that people sometimes get hung up on or confused about, and are maybe hesitant to apply for these types of awards, is the nature of IP. Can you kind of explain a little more detail, like what is a company's obligation to the government in terms of their IP that's developed from SBIR or STTR funding?
I appreciate it. So obviously any IP that's filed and is based upon federal support is ultimately something that under the Bayh-Dole Act is the federal government may potentially have marching rights upon should they need to do that. You will need to disclose that in iEdison, which is the database for federally funded IP. Outside of that, the company can continue to prosecute that IP and utilize that IP. I think it's only really in terms of national emergencies or times of crisis where that marching rights may be applied to your IP. I can't think of a great scenario to give you where that may potentially exist or happen, but it is something to be aware of, that IP that is developed specifically based around the R&D that you are undertaking using US taxpayer dollars as part of the SBIR STTR program, utilizing federal funding. Ultimately, the federal government may have ultimate recourse to potentially use in times of national emergency or in times of crisis. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. Is there a typical length of time that an individual holds the IP for through IP developed through the SBIR program?
I'd be absolutely candid with you, Carl. I don't know the answer to that question. I could go away and look it up for you, or if you want to contact me afterwards, if someone's got a specific question about timeframes, I can happily connect you with the resources at the NSF in order to do that.
Yeah, that sounds good, Alistair. I can reach out, and then if someone has that specific question.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just don't actually know the answer to that, so I'm happy to connect you with.
No, I think that'll do it for now.
Cool. Thank you, Alistair. I think we have time for one more.
Hey, I heard a rumor that you're.
I think we have time for one more question. I'll see if there's any in the chat. Thank you. Final question. I see that we've talked about the SBIR phase 1 funding, the SBIR 2 phase funding, and the SBIR 2B funding. Is there a phase 3 strict commercialization program through the NSF?
No, it's a great question. No, there isn't. At that point, we would obviously hope that you would be in a position to graduate beyond the NSF programs and potentially achieve commercial success via other sources of fundraising or capital.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Alistair. And I see that Raymond did put in one final question, so I will ask it for his benefit. Because the focus is on high-risk technology development, does the fact that others may have failed at doing what's in our proposal help or hurt if we are taking a very different approach?
I appreciate the question. That's kind of a difficult question to unwrap, Raymond, just because you're obviously taking a different approach than the same approach that's been done before. I think ultimately, areas that we're interested in looking at are high risk, high reward type areas. So if experts in the field are not potentially able to easily re-engineer what you're doing, or to potentially be able to decipher what you're doing easily or to reconstruct it, then that's obviously a bonus, I think, in terms of the potential, competitive advantage you may have because you have some form of innovation. I think doing what others are doing, or have been unable to do, I should say, doing it differently, I think it's one of those things where we would still want to understand what the scientific rationale is, or what the basic engineering principles are that would believe, or would allow you to believe, that you would be successful with the approach that you have. We do not need pilot data, we do not need proof of concept data, but we do probably need some form of solid scientific rationale or engineering principles, as I just said, in order to say why this approach may be successful where others have tried to tackle it and failed. So again, I don't know if it's a bonus, or it's certainly not a black mark to try to tackle a major challenge that nobody else has been able to tackle. I think there are, as we've talked about, severe societal and many other challenges that we face right now that do require a number of approaches. So again, applying new practices to do that I think is in the benefit, and obviously if it has a high reward type at the end, it's certainly something that we'd love to see you bring forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Alistair. That's all the time we have for the Q&A. Alistair, I appreciate your candor and level of depth in answering some of these questions. I'm going to kick it back over to Steve Zylstra, who can close us out. Over to you, Steve.
Alistair, thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation, and I think our audience only stumped you on one question, which you're going to get back to us on, which is pretty good at such a complex topic. So very much appreciate your expertise and your presentation today. Thank you, Kyle, for helping to field the questions. Thank you, ACA, for being an ongoing partner in this series. I do want to mention again that on April 19th, we're going to have Beyond Agriculture, Unlocking the USDA's SBIR program. Again, that'll be a free event. And by the way, there's a lot of technology being applied to ag these days, whether it's AI, robotics, sensors, optics, imaging, et cetera. So very technologically savvy organization as well. So thank you all for being here today. Please follow up with any of us, Kyle or Jill or myself, if you have further questions, and look forward to seeing you at the next event. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you again, Alistair.
We appreciate the opportunity.